there is a bit of a, to put it lightly, shortage of random access memory for computers in the consumer market. Now, other videos go into more detail than this one will about that issue, because I'm mostly using it to illustrate a point. But essentially, OpenAI and other artificial intelligence development firms have been making massive purchases of RAM to use for their AI data centers. Demand is so lucrative, and profit margins so much higher for selling to data centers than selling to traditional consumers, that we even have some chip producers like Micron pulling out of the consumer market entirely. It's exactly a dynamic like this, which will be the last straw that will make the dream of robot domestic houseworkers an impossibility for anyone except for the ultra-rich. I say last line because there are plenty of other obstacles to consider before getting to the point of humanoid robots that have sufficient capacities to carry out domestic labor tasks. And plenty of question as to whether or not that a robot that looks like a person is what you actually want for that role. As for the question of the obstacles to domestic robots, see, there's a very basic fact in the way. If a robot is cheap and versatile enough to handle domestic physical labor, its predecessors must have long annihilated any physical labor jobs that pay better than being a domestic laborer in the process of getting there. Even if companies producing these robots committed to specifically making domestic labor robots, you can essentially guarantee that businesses would be making massive orders of these robots to repurpose them to put to work for their own purposes. Realistically though, just like Micron pulling out of consumer chips, any company in that line of development is probably just going to turn to where the profits are greatest, which is almost certainly not going to be in the consumer sector. Especially when you consider the fact that consumer spending in this environment can be expected to be much weaker. Why? Consumers would be losing all of their jobs to these robots, that's why. See, the mistake here being made by a lot of techno-optimists is thinking that robots will enter the home in much the same way that consumer appliances like the microwave did in the 1950s and the 60s. They think this because they don't really understand how that process works. The microwaves, automobiles, the refrigerators, the TVs went to consumers because there were only so many that can be sold to industry. Same thing with personal computers, except that now the computers can be used to think for themselves. We are kind of even seeing that roll back, which proves the point. If a robot that is just as capable of doing physical tasks as a human being comes along, the industry demand for that is going to be essentially all physical human jobs that don't require a human emotional touch or something. In fact, per hour worked, the robot could be much more expensive than a human being, and it would still be more worth it for the companies than hiring people. They wouldn't get sick, they don't go on strike, they don't get cold, they don't get hot. They don't lounge around and they don't get tired. Of course, you'd have to worry about maintenance, but even then, that's more of a question of when those issues are sufficiently dealt with, not if they'd ever be sufficiently dealt with. All of that is worth paying a hefty premium, never mind if it drops below the cost of employing human labor. If you assume, too, that it's possible to reach a saturation point where physical jobs have been automated and now robots can trickle into the regular consumer, you'd be wrong, with companies providing each other and rich people with goods and services. And if all else fails, supplying the internal and external security forces of governments, which I promise you could see a whole lot of use for robots, one way or another, with the public unrest and ravenous demand for natural resources that would suddenly emerge across the world. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment.